You're listening to the Cultivating Careers in Alternative Proteins podcast, a podcast which features students and early career professionals who work in the alternative protein industry, where they discuss their journeys and deliver advice on how you can start a career in this revolutionary field. Thank you for tuning in to another enlightening episode of this podcast. The guest for this episode is Ella Wong, who is the head of design and operations of The Good Growth Co. The Good Growth Co. is a Hong Kong-based market research and service design consultancy for alternative protein companies, animal welfare nonprofits, and social impact ventures in Asia. Prior to her role at The Good Growth Co., Ella was the program manager at the Global Institute for Tomorrow, worked in business development at Swire Properties, and was the education programs manager for the General Assembly. And now, on to my interview with Ella. Hello, Ella, and welcome to the Cultivating Careers in Alternative Proteins podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you were able to be on the show.
Yeah, definitely. It's my first podcast recording, so hopefully it goes well.
I'm sure it'll be fine. As a warm-up question, I like to ask my guests, what inspired you to want to work on alternative proteins?
So I would say about 4 or 5 years ago, I just came to this realization. I've been reading some articles in the media of the omnivore's dilemma, that I love dogs, love a lot of animals, but then why am I still consuming animals myself? That's when I started an ongoing, continuous journey on cutting animal products from my diet, from my life. There's definitely a personal motivation for me to be interested in all protein. I think career-wise, I also was always looking for something that I was passionate about, that I personally believed in. But I think that's hard to do that in your career. And personally, I've always been working in the tech startup space. I actually realized that alt protein comes together very well for me in terms of aligning personal interest and career experience.
Awesome. And how did you first come across alternative proteins?
I think my first memory of alt protein in terms of the new technology was it 4 or 5 years ago now that Impossible, they were going to come to Hong Kong for the first time. And it was actually at an event that I was organizing. So the vendor that we worked with was like, hey, we have this new plant-based meat product. We would love to introduce it at your event. And then I still remember at that time, I was like, what? Why? What do you mean plant-based meat? And also, what if our clients don't like it? Would you still have other meat options? It was a back and forth conversation, but we did end up having a product at our event. I tried it. To be honest, I think the first version wasn't the best. I mean, it smelled really good, but the texture still needed some refinement. That was my first experience of all protein. So I think the years after, you've seen there's been a lot more products. Products have been refining and just keeps getting better and better.
Yeah, I think it's quite amazing how much they've improved since then.
Yeah, definitely. So I think for Hong Kong, it wasn't even their first launch. It was like the first probably few markets they already started selling in the US. It's really cool to see the improvements in technology, even in the last few years.
Yeah, and at this rate of quality improvement, who knows what they're going to be like in, say, 10 years?
Yeah, I think that's what's very exciting for the alt protein space is that it's not just plant-based, it's also fermentation and cultivated and potential hybrid products that will just really improve everything, texture, the quality, the flavor. And hopefully after we pass away, I would imagine that people would look back and think, why do we ever eat animal products in the first place when we have all these great food products made from plants?
Yeah, and we've just barely scratched the surface. There's so much underexplored areas in this space that who knows, we may uncover something that just is spectacular.
Yeah, so I was part of this alternative protein fundamentals course. And so we would do discussions every week. And I remember one of the things we talked about is right now we're still trying to mimic meat products or animal products. But what if the science actually brings us to something better, something we cannot think about? And I think, that really is the future, as in something that we can't really imagine right now that is better than the burgers that we're used to.
Yeah, definitely. It was sort of analogous to cheese. before cheese was ever invented, no one ever thought that milk or dairy could get much better. And then someone stumbled across the idea of making cheese, and now as a society, we could struggle to live without it.
Yeah, definitely.
So, could you explain more about how you eventually came to work for the Good Growth Co?
Sure. Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, I've been in the tech startup space in Hong Kong. So, I worked in PR, program management, user experience design in different teams, but they're all related to either a startup or kind of innovation space. And then about 2 years ago, I started working for this sustainability think tank. And even though I was going all over the world talking about climate change or the problems of overconsumption, I felt like what we're doing was not really making an actual impact that I was hoping for. And so I reconnected with friends I met in the startup space, and Jia Ying, who's the founder of Good Growth. We had met when she was still running her previous startup, and I was running an accelerator program that she was part of. When I reconnected with her, she was looking for help with some UX design. So we hit it off, and then we started collaborating on just different projects together.
Ah, okay. And can you please explain more about what Good Growth Company is and the type of work that they do?
Good Growth, we're based in Hong Kong, and we are a user and market research company for sustainable food systems, and we mostly target the Asia region. So the people we mainly serve are organizations or companies in the all protein, plant-based diet or farmed animal welfare space. And we do research and design projects that can help them understand their consumers, their stakeholders, and develop strategy in Asia.
Okay. And what do you do as your role as the head of design and operations at the Good Growth Co?
So currently we are a 2.5 person team. So really we have to do everything. I do lead research projects. So that's project management, liaising with the client, the actual research. So research, interviews, analysis, report writing. And then another important component of our research, especially the ones where we get grant funding, so it's open research, is the distribution of it. Because you can spend a lot of time doing research, but if no one reads it, then really it's not useful. And so we talk with a lot of stakeholders, email them. Sometimes we run webinars or discussions or meetings to share these insights. And so distribution of research is another big part of my role. And then lastly, as the kind of name of the title says, operations. So a lot of just internal things. So finance, budgeting, IT support, website updates. And also because we're still a growing organization, so we do a lot of business development. So that's either writing grant proposals or writing proposals for kind of specific client work.
Okay. And what would you say are some of your accomplishments within that role?
I would say some of the biggest accomplishments so far is completing different research studies. So one of them is a mixed methods consumer research about Chinese consumers and what they think about plant-based products. So by mixed methods, we mean we conducted qualitative studies of Chinese consumers. So we ran focus groups, we did food diary studies to really understand what these Chinese consumers thought in depth about their diet, why they eat certain foods, what they think about plant-based meat. And then based on that, we developed certain personas. So kind of groups of people based on their food consumption motivations. So for example, there are called concerned parents. So they are motivated by what they think is best for their children. And that's what they would buy in terms of food. There are also people like social foodies. So their big motivator for choosing what to eat is what they can put on social media or what their friends tell them to eat. And so based on that, we then did a 1,200-person survey, so a quantitative study to kind of validate, see if there were these groups of people within the broader Chinese population. And we did find that 84% of people identified with one or more of these groups. And so what we hope to achieve from this study is that companies, advocates in the plant-based space, they can really target their messaging, refine their product development strategy, come up with new products based on what consumers are motivated to eat right now or why they choose to eat certain foods over others. So that's definitely one of our biggest reports that we've done so far.
Okay. And what are you hoping that the outcome or implications of that report might be?
We hope that companies and investors and also advocates, they can take some of these insights to then refine their marketing messaging or their product development strategy, or if they're an advocate, kind of long-term diet change. And it will just help them be more specific to what the consumers are thinking right now. Because I think what we found in the research is in China and really generally across Asia, there are still just a lot of barriers to consuming alt protein. For example, there's higher costs compared to traditional meat products. There's also a different level of qualities among brands. So sometimes people might try one and they're like, oh, I don't like it. And they don't try the other ones. I think most importantly is just a lack of reason to consume these products. So they just don't think these products are for them. So I think it's really important to target the current food consumption motivators, refine their messaging, refine their products, and then also, while at the same time, promote longer term change in terms of dietary behavior.
Ah, okay. And what do you feel makes your job really special or unique?
I think what is really interesting is we're a consultancy, so we're not tied to a certain company or a certain organization, and we can be more of a outsider looking in to advise these companies or orgs on what are their best kind of strategy or messaging that they could look into. And also, alternatively, we're able to do all this kind of open research, especially advocacy organizations. They don't really have the money to spend on research. And so we're able to provide them with insights that they might need. So, for example, besides the consumer study, we also did a capacity building gap study of farm animal welfare orgs in Asia. And for that one, we talked to different advocates in the space, understood what their organizational challenges are. And then we wrote this report and are now distributing it to donors, capacity builders in the region. So it can help them come up with better strategies to help these organizations grow. Because a lot of them are very small, they're very grassroots. And so I think that's kind of our unique positioning, that we are able to do these types of research that's open to everyone and not just for a certain company or org that has the resources.
Okay. So how do you see the market research work that you're doing shaping the alternative protein field moving forward?
So I think kind of mentioned earlier, how do we push past the current barriers for consumers to consume alt protein is really to give them a reason to do it, like give them motivators. And so I think in the short term, refine your messaging, refine your product that's more tailored to what different groups of consumers want. But then also in the long term, based on what they're thinking now, come up with better strategies that can incentivize them or push them to change their diets. So I think that would take a lot more research in understanding why would people change their diets. And especially in Asia, where the context might be very different to consumers in the West, some of the motivators that we think a lot of consumers in the West have just apply very differently, or the messaging might be very different. So yeah, I think research would really help in that space.
Yeah, so speaking of the future, where do you see yourself in the future, and maybe what are some of the projects that you hope to work on?
So I think instead of specific things that we want to work on, I definitely hope to see good growth grow as an organization, and not just in size really or the number of projects, but I think in terms of the type of projects and the work that we do. I think we want to see research as not just a one-off project where it's done and then here you go, here's a report. We want to really see it as a cycle. So for good growth, we want to help organizations do research, understand their consumers, understand their stakeholders, and then we also want to help them test their messaging and their products. So that's what a lot of startups in the tech startup space do. They would do research, come up with a prototype, and then test and then iterate. I believe that's what we can also help a lot of companies and orgs in the alt protein space do. And hopefully we'll be able to do projects where we can kind of work on this cycle together. So it's not just a one off.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, do you have any advice for people who would want to get into the alternative protein industry or want to learn more about it?
I'm not sure how it is in the West or the US, but definitely I think for any big city, a big part of finding a new job, especially if you're looking, transition or change your industry is networking. I don't think I've ever successfully applied for a job cold. It's always through people or referrals or talking to people. And so I think for anyone who's looking for a job in our protein space, definitely talk to as many people as you can and reach out to them on LinkedIn. I found that people in our protein space are very open to chatting and very friendly. I think it's because it's such a small space, everyone's learning. And so definitely networking is very important. I think for people who are just starting out in their career, knowing that you don't need to be overly concerned that your first few jobs are perfect. Because I think what I've realized is there's never a perfect job. It's really about the experience that you can get and the skills that you can acquire. And so it's okay if your first job is not the place where you stay in forever. And then for mid to senior people, I would say, especially those who are looking to transition, as in move into the alt protein industry, maybe you come from a different space, start with some skilled volunteering projects. I think a lot of advocacy organizations, even small orgs like ourselves, could do with a lot of help to where you can gain experience or even paid freelance projects to really get that industry experience first. And then you're able to kind of sell yourself a lot better to find a job in this space.
Yeah, those are all fantastic points of advice, and I am a huge advocate for networking. I think it's definitely one of the most effective ways to get a job. Similar to you, a good portion of the jobs I've gotten in the past have been through networking, so it's definitely very advantageous. It requires some effort to build your network and to connect with people, but it definitely will pay off in the long run.
Yeah, and I think also it's a good kind of reminder to never burn bridges as well, because you never know, maybe this person you're working for now will become your hire in the future. So definitely to just keep those relationships going would be important.
Yeah, absolutely. And you never know where life may take you, and you may need to lean on them in the future for a favor or something else.
Yeah, and vice versa. I'm always happy to help people who want CV or an interview support. I think, especially in Asia, we just need more people interested in the space. So it's good to help each other out.
Yeah, I think there's very much a pay it forward mentality I've noticed in this field.
Yeah, and I think that's great. There's not too many secrets. Everyone's very open.
Yeah. So, are there any specific resources that you would recommend to people who are interested in this industry?
So I would say first thing that comes to mind is the alternative protein fundamentals program that I joined. I think it's a really great program because you get assigned to different groups. There's a business track and then there's a science track and there's weekly discussions. But then other than that, there's also a huge group of people in the Slack channel who are part of other groups or from past cohorts. So I think it's a really good place to start, just understanding who people are, what people are interested in. And another thing is because we have weekly discussions, it forces you to do the readings. Even if you think you really understand what plant based meat is, actually, there's a lot of science behind it that you might not know. Or as a scientist, you might not think about the business side of things or consumer side of things. So, yeah, it's definitely a really good, I would say, starter for people, even if you already have some experience in the space.
Yeah, definitely. I facilitated that program both times that it's run so far, and even as someone who's been very involved in the space for a while, I'm still am amazed every time I go through the material and I'm like, oh right, I forgot about that aspect of it. So yeah, definitely extremely informed experience, and I'll provide a link to their interest form for the next session that they'll be running.
Definitely. Highly recommend it.
So is Good Growth actively hiring for any roles?
So we did just make our first hire recently, part-time researcher. So right now we don't have any hiring needs, but we're always looking for collaborators for projects. Sometimes we might need, for example, like vet experts for farmed animal welfare projects or people with connections in the op protein space for market research project. So yeah, definitely just contact us. We're always happy to chat. And then also, we're looking for some pro bono advisors for our advisory board. So we're looking to really set up our org with some advisors to advise on our projects. This is for people who have experience in China, experience in Asia, in research and sustainable food systems. So please reach out to us if you're interested to know more.
All right. And what is the best way for people to reach out to you?
They can email me at ella@goodgrowth.io or they can find me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. I will provide links to those in the show notes.
Great. Thank you.
Appreciate you taking the time to share your insights and experiences.
Yeah, hopefully that was useful. And this is a great initiative. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no, this is great. Thank you. I hope you found this episode as illuminating as I did. The main takeaway is that consultancy work, such as market research, is greatly beneficial to assisting with consumer adoption of alternative proteins. Also, aside from roles at alternative protein startups, there are a plethora of roles at meta-organizations in this space which are needed, meaning that everyone, including you, can be a part of the alternative protein revolution. If you want to learn more about careers in the alternative protein industry, please follow the Cultivating Careers in Alternative Protein podcast on Instagram for weekly posts about episode releases, alternative protein resources, job boards, career advice, and so much more.